So our base colors that we have are going to be, our sky is going to be a mixture of Phthalo Blue red shade plus Cobalt Blue. The Cobalt Blue will help kind of tone down that Phthalo Blue red shade, but also keeping in mind Phthalo Blue red shade doles out when it dries, which is actually ideal for us. We have Quinacridone Rose, New Gamboge. My Ultramarine Blue already had some of the other colors in it, but that's Ultramarine Blue and Indian Red. So those are kind of our 6 base colors. Interestingly enough, we do have 3 blues in there, but with a landscape that is so dominated by blues, I find that it's really helpful to have a lot of different options to iterate across the landscape. And I will also be very intentionally using some of that Cobalt Blue as my shadow color. And I also anticipate lightening my sky a little bit from how it actually appears in order to help those shadows stand out even more. And I have not troubleshot my greens yet, but I anticipate that will be, likely just my New Gamboge or some of my blues. So we can do some of this here. We can try New Gamboge with Ultramarine Blue. That's going to be, I think, a little bit too weak of a color. It's not quite dark enough. So let's try New Gamboge instead with like our Phthalo Blue green shade. Very nice. Or Phthalo Blue red shade, sorry. Phthalo Blue red shade, that'll be kind of a nice, dark, really vibrant green. And we can tone that down if we so desire with rose to make it more of kind of a blacky purple. And we can even add a little bit of Indian red if we really want to kind of pump up the darkness and the red appearance of that color. So that'll give us probably one of our darkest colors that we'll be using a fair bit in like almost the black zones of our painting. And I want to preview that for you. And then the other mixtures I'll preview once I get back to the studio. All right, now that I am back in the studio, back at home, I wanted to go through some of the color mixtures with a little bit more, less time crunch. So across the top here, I have all those colors I just listed when I was in the field: New Gamboge, Quinacridone Rose, Indian Red, and that's named Indian Red not after indigenous people, but after the country of India, where the original pigment for that came from. I have Phthalo Blue red shade, Cobalt Blue, Ultramarine Blue. At the very end, I use a little bit of Hansa yellow medium to get a very bright kind of different color green. So I use a little bit of that. Optional, you don't have to use that. And then the first thing I want to go over, which is kind of off to the side here, I had tried to mix a couple different options for alternates to Phthalo Blue red shade, because many of you might have Phthalo Blue green shade. So you can get pretty darn close. This first one is by mixing just Phthalo Blue green shade with a little bit of that rose color. So that could be an option to get you pretty close. You can see that when that does dry, however, it's a little bit more dull in appearance because of the pink. So it's not perfect, but it's close enough and that could work. Otherwise, you could also just do, like this was me trying to do Ultramarine Blue and Phthalo Blue green shade, which was a little bit too like bright and vibrant. So maybe, just using some Cobalt Blue on its own, or if you want a brighter, kind of more greenish appearance, using Phthalo Blue green shade could work as well. Or you can be experimental and try mixing in some ultramarine. So there's lots of different options on how you can approach those different colors. And I really don't use also that much of the Phthalo Blue red shade. So if you don't have any, don't worry about it. I'm just going to kind of start mixing, putting out a little bit of my Cobalt Blue, adding a little bit of Phthalo Blue red shade. Really the only reason I like to use either Phthalo Blue red or green shade along with Cobalt is that I find that it just kind of gives me a really nice foundation to work from, because the Cobalt, it granulates quite a bit, and then the Phthalo Blue kind of fills it in. So there's our darker color. Then we can just kind of take some clean water and just thin that color out, just so we can kind of play with it and have a chance just to see how that color will go from a darker to a lighter color in appearance. So for the reflection, I just take the same color I use for my upper part of the sky and just add the teeniest little bit of rose, like really just a couple swipes through the rose, just enough that it makes it a little bit kind of shifted of the color, but not enough that I'm really totally changing that to a purple. So I still want a blue and not a purple. And you can see side by side here that that color is definitely more toward the kind of reddish or slightly purplish side of the color spectrum. And that's all that we need. And you can definitely shift this more to the rose side and the red side if you would like. And I think in that painting I also added just the tiniest little bit of my New Gamboge, because what that does is you can see how now when I put that color over here, the addition of a tiny bit of New Gamboge will just kind of ever so slightly shift that color toward the tiny bit grayish and tone down the vibrancy just a little bit when that dries. So by adding, a little bit of rose and even less of that yellow, it'll kind of take that into this more subdued, more purple tone. And my shadow colors will actually be quite similar to these two, just with the addition of some ultramarine blue. So that ultramarine, you can see how very vibrant it is, so it kind of helps bring a really nice quality to shadows. So I'll just have some cobalt. And I'm actually going to skip the phthalo blue red shade now in the shadows and just have cobalt, a little bit of ultramarine there. And for these upper shadows, that's going to be pretty much where it is. You know, I can keep it right in this space. Maybe I'll add just a tiny bit of pink to make it a little bit, tiniest bit purple. So for our upper shadows, we might end up, I mean, feel a little bit too purple there. I might end up somewhere kind of right in here. So you can see how it's a nice kind of, you know, not too purplish, not too pinkish color. And I might even be tempted just to add just a little tiny bit of new Gamboge again, just to kind of tone that color down a wee bit. So we take it, see how it looks green at first and it kind of blends in, and that color kind of has a nice, you know, more subdued cast to it. If I add more rose and I start to get more purple, and that's maybe what it would look like for the bottom part. And that's a bit too saturated possibly, so it's good to practice our color for this exact reason, because then we can kind of get a better idea of like, okay, you know, how much color do I actually need to make a shadow that feels like it's the right value range. So this up here in this corner might be too dark, but then down below might be just right. So I'm just kind of tinkering in with that and pushing and pulling those different colors together. Again, we're using ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, a little bit of rose, and just a tiny bit of our quinacridone or our new Gamboge again to kind of play with those shadow colors. And as you can see over here, that as these colors dry, they will tone down quite a bit in terms of like they'll become less saturated. And that's where the addition of that ultramarine blue kind of helps over here, because it will keep these colors just a wee bit more vibrant as they kind of, you know, dry out a little bit on our palette. So, and you can choose how pinky or purpley you want your mixes to go. You know, like this one up here feels too purpley for the top of the mountain, so I can just add more cobalt to that to kind of bring it back to that more vibrant blue. And down below, I can just use the other color, a little bit more purple, basically, a little bit more pink, to make it look like the reflected color. And the reason that we're working kind of back and forth between a slightly more greenish blue and a slightly more purplish blue is because of that reflection. So if we look at the actual painting over here, when we're working with these colors, it's that very gentle color shift from the more greenish colors to the more slightly purplish colors and warmer colors in the bottom of the painting. It's that color shift that helps as another visual cue to tell the viewer what's happening in this painting. All right, now we get to move on to some of our rock colors, and this one will kind of be a lot of different stuff. We're going to have, I didn't use any cobalt in the rock, so I used our ultramarine blue, our rose, some Indian red gets thrown in there, and then I also ended up throwing in just a little bit of new Gamboge just to kind of tone that down again and for harmony's sake. So our rocks, we're going to end up with kind of two distinct colors. We're going to have this color here that will be kind of a more purplish red color, and I want a little bit more yellow in there actually. Those rocks were starting to kind of glow in that evening light, so it's definitely leaning toward almost a brown. So here's like this color right here, and you can play with the amount of, you know, if you add more yellow to this, then it will take it more in the yellow side of things. Like we can just do that, so we can kind of take it even to this space. If you add more pink to that, then it will take it into more of like a mauve type space, and even more Indian red will take it into like a very pink mauve. So you can choose where you want to end up in this little spectrum of colors right here. I end up kind of right in that middle and tending up and toward the browner stuff, so kind of right in these upper two. But the fun part is that we also then have the rocks that are in the more shade. So for those, we have kind of that same starting color with the rose and the Indian red and the new Gamboge. Let me just add a lot more of our ultramarine blue. A lot more ultramarine blue, and also a little, maybe not too much more rose, but we have to kind of keep adding ultramarine blue until it goes really nice and blue and less in the kind of brownish zone. So you can see how we're getting closer now. It's still kind of brownish, and I don't mind that, but I think I want to go even more kind of toward the blue side. So I'll just add even more ultramarine blue. Working on this painting, I'm going to have kind of two puddles on my palette. I'll have the more bluish green kind of rock color, then I'll have right next to that the more kind of pinkish yellowish color. And that's feeling pretty close to what I had in the painting. I may have even just done like a tiny bit of the brown and quite a bit more ultramarine like you see right there. So if I thin that color out so you can see it better, this color right there looks about like that. It's quite bluey and quite dramatically so. The important thing to notice is that with these colors, I'm not doing them at absolute darkest concentration. You can still see some of the white of the paper showing through. That's very intentional because I want to reserve my darkest darks for my trees. So my rocks can be close, but they may not be quite as dark, or they'll be just shy of my trees. And you can kind of see that in the painting. I bring it over, how this is just ever so slightly a little bit less dark in value than like what you see here in parts of those trees. It's subtle, but it's there. And then last but not least, we have our colors for our trees. And these are quite fun because we get to just kind of explore and have fun with different mixtures. So I guess the first thing I'll show for the trees was actually that color I kind of gravitated toward for the meadow. When I decided I really actually wanted quite a vibrant green at one point, that's when I just made the kind of spur of the moment decision to take some of my Hansa yellow medium and then to add just a little bit of, let me double check my notes here. It was Cobalt Blue, and that should be getting us right toward that kind of nice meadow green color. So that will kind of get us this really nice, bright, vibrant, nice meadow color. And that color doesn't, in my painting, you can see where I added that color. It kind of got covered up a little bit, but it's definitely still there a little bit. But as this painting dried, a lot of the paints kind of blended together, so I kind of lost a little bit of that meadow area that I put in. We will have a lot of new Gamboge in our trees. And there's some areas where I did almost straight new Gamboge. Then we'll also be adding some of our Phthalo blue red shade to that. And if we just do those two colors together, you can see that it gets this really vibrant, nice, dark green color, which I definitely use in a few places in my trees, but this color still feels almost too perfectly green for that landscape. And if I thin it down, you can see that a little bit better. So it's just very, very perfectly green. So what I found that I did, instead of just using that color alone, is I had that green color and I would either add some Ultramarine Blue to it, and that helped to kind of make it either, that felt a little bit more embedded into that landscape. But I could also start adding some rose to that, which starts to get some really fun effects. Quite a nice kind of purpley, like starting to get a slightly grayish blue there, or grayish blue green. And we also have some other, I love these mixtures of colors. They're honestly so fun. Because we can add some rose, we can even add some Indian red. And if we start layering on even some more ultramarine into this and more of the phthalo blue green shade, the more kind of we add, and now we're getting into a really dark color. So we can actually end up starting just kind of nice, dark greenish gray. And then of course, adding more of that phthalo blue red shade. So we'll kind of take this back into like this color right here is kind of the color I used for my darkest trees on the left side of the painting, where I really wanted that noticeably kind of dark, bright, deep blue. So I can thin that out so you can see it better. Then of course it's kind of fun sometimes too to kind of drop in like some ultramarine blue into that area. And then you could also, maybe in some areas, just drop in kind of some straight or almost straight up new Gamboge and do that in a couple places, and that's kind of a fun thing. And you can even just kind of mix right on your page and see what happens with your different colors. So there's lots of different ways to approach how we mix color on this painting. I also do have a fair number of spots where I have new Gamboge with just a little bit of those kind of bluey tones, like right on the right in here. And you can see how that's a color that appears quite a few times in those trees, which is kind of fun. So it's kind of this brownish, like kind of a brownish green, which is a really nice fun color. And if I want to make it more green, again, you can just add more of your phthalo blue red shade or whatever blue you're using. And then I also had a lot of fun being pretty fearless with kind of some like almost more browny colors. So I had a lot of new Gamboge paired with some rose, and then a little bit of Indian red, and then just a little bit of my blue. And I get something kind of right in here. So I used this in a couple places, like a straight up brown I dropped in. And I decided I wanted to make that even more rosy in a couple places. So I had some fun just kind of really making a nice purple. And I definitely dropped in some purple in a few spots as well. And I wanted kind of purple yellow. So that's just some new Gamboge, some rose, and a bit of my blue green. And I can add, I think I even had a bit more dramatic rose in there. So I end up with this, there we go, there's the color. So I just took a little bit more of my lovely new Gamboge and my rose to get that kind of vibrant color that I have in just a couple spots in that painting. So the trees kind of have all of this happening. And if we look back at the painting, then we can see more easily where those different colors go. So you can see in here that there's that kind of purpley color I was just mixing up, and then here's that kind of darker blue. And I wanted to make a quick note about the colors in a lot of the painting, but especially down here, And that is that because this part of my painting did not dry literally until like 4 a.m. So I finished this around 9, and it took many, many hours to actually dry out sitting in the vestibule of my tent. A lot of this kind of like, see that light yellow haloing effect? That happened well after I finished the painting. That just happened while it was sitting there getting damper and damper while I was walking it back to camp. And all the kind of granulating settling of the different colors in here, that also kind of happened while it was sitting. And the colors here are not at the darkest they can go. Like if we kind of contrast them with like this color here, it's almost a black. I didn't really go that black except for in just a couple spots, right, in here and here. And then lastly, to wrap things up, I just wanted to share a really simple exercise that I started doing as a way to reflect on and learn even more from my paintings. And that is to put all of my different colors, the base colors I used, and the mixtures on a color wheel. And obviously I didn't get every single one, but I tried to get kind of a rough representative sample of all the different colors. So the way this works is that on the inner circle, I have my base colors, so the pigments that come right out of the palette. And that was again Hansa Yellow Medium, New Gamboge, Indian Red, our Quinacridone Rose, Ultramarine Blue, Phthalo Blue Red shade, and Cobalt Blue. And then around those, kind of radiating outwards on that circle and placed roughly where those mixtures would fall in the color wheel, I have the other kind of color mixtures that I created. And I really started enjoying this exercise as a way to learn even more from my painting, because I feel like it helps me better understand why a painting might have succeeded, or why the colors worked well together or they did not work well together. In this painting, I felt like, as soon as I finished it, I really enjoyed the colors. They seemed to all work well together. I was really happy with the result. So it was just kind of a fun way to visualize the different mixtures that I used. And then of course, it's also fun to be able to put the two of these together, and you can just kind of then look around the painting and see where those different colors appear throughout. So I hope you enjoyed this little video and this exploration into the colors that I used to work on this beautiful scene of Mount Rainier. And if you would like to learn more and see the step-by-step instruction of how I approached this scene when I was actually on site sitting right beside this beautiful little pond, then I invite you to check out my Adventure Art Academy classes. This was one of my favorite classes from last year. It was just so much fun to paint. And as always, thank you for going on a little painting adventure with me here on YouTube. And if you enjoyed this video, please do hit that like button or comment, or even better, subscribe so you get notified of upcoming videos, as every one of those actions does help me be able to make more content and share it with more people out here. Well, there goes our light, and there goes the mountain back behind the clouds. Wow, what an incredible, incredible spot that we got to paint. I just feel so unbelievably lucky. That was unreal and so fun. Turn around and something amazing's happening again. Also, this is what 10,000% why my painting is not drying, but just a little bit of moisture in the atmosphere. Oh my gosh. Well, carrying the painting out because it is not drying whatsoever. It is so foggy. It is not drying. So the painting gets to be carried out. Look at all that fog. There's a little painting drying in the vestibule of the tent.